Now let's look at the arithmetic operations, and these apply to both integers and floats. So what you would expect to see, negation, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulo, which I mentioned before, the remainder of A divided by B, and exponentiation. So this is new in PHP 5.6 and on. We're running 5.6.12 right now, so this works for our PHP, but may not work in some older versions. So a couple of things to be aware of. Division always returns a float value unless the two operands are integers and the numbers are evenly divisible. So if you divide 4 by 2 and 4 and 2 are integers, you get 2, which is also an integer. But in any other case, you're going to get a floating point number back. So let's go ahead and try some of these out, and we'll see what we get. So sometimes these will do conversion and sometimes they won't. So let's create an int value 1, which is equal to 5, and an int value 2 equal to 7. And then let's create a float value 1, which is equal to 23.4, and a float value 2, which will do 6.2. So echo A over B equals, and then let's try an int value 1 divided by an int value 2. And since I'm not entirely sure about operator precedence, whether dot has precedence over slash, and since it's a good idea in any event, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this part in parentheses. So now I don't have to worry about whether the dot happens first or whether the slash happens first. And then let's try that with two floating point numbers and see what we get. So a float value 1 and a float value 2. And we'll go ahead and say integer and float. So let's go back to Chrome and reload our numbers.php. So we see A over B is a float and A over B is a float. How about if we add two numbers? So we'll do A plus B. And A plus B, since A and B are both integers, we end up with an integer. A and B are floats, we end up with a float. If we add a float to an integer, like so, we have a little problem here. Undefined variable, so I have a little typo in an integer value 2. So let's go ahead and see what that is. An int value 2. So that's what happens when you try to access a variable that hasn't been declared. There. So when you add a float to an int, you get a float. Hopefully that's not too surprising. So addition, and then we'll go ahead and do multiplication. And subtraction should be pretty obvious. And then this one, maybe not as obvious. So we'll do modulo. And then let's see what we get. So multiplication of ints gets ints, multiplication of floats gets floats, addition and subtraction work the same way. And then interestingly, when you do modulo with either ints or floats, you get an integer result coming back. So one other thing is exponentiation. So for example, if I want to raise 2 to the power of 3, I can write 2 star star 3 in PHP 5.6 or later. If I want to get the same effect in earlier versions of PHP, you can use the pow function for power. So 2 raised to the third power should be the same as 2 star star 3. I should get 8 either way. And I didn't put a break in there, so they're jammed together and it looks like 88. There, now 8 and 8. So how about if you raise a number to the power of a float? So for example, 16 raised to the 0.5 power. That's 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. So this is basically the same thing as taking the square root of a number. And if you want to take the cube root of a number, like the cube root of 8, I expect to get some rounding issues here, but it's 2. There we go. So the cube root of 8 is 2, the square root of 16 is 4.